10.1 is adding and subtracting polynomials. So what we're going to do before we add and subtract the polynomials is we're going to talk about what a polynomial is, all right? So the first thing that we have when we're talking about polynomials is the number of terms that there are. If I were to have something like 2x to the third power, this is considered one term. Even though there are two, I guess we could say pieces, all right, it is still considered one term. Now, when I have a plus or a minus sign, that is going to be my break between terms, I guess, if you will. So if we had 2x cubed plus 3, now I have two terms. This is my first term, and this is my second. Okay, so we have more than one term, and that's what we consider polynomials. Now, before we add or subtract polynomials, what do I have to have in order to add terms? Angelica? Like terms, because I could not just go and add those together and get 5x to the third power, because they're not like terms. Now, if I had 2x cubed plus 3x cubed, now they are like terms because they have the same variable raised to the same exponent, and I could add them together. All right, so first of all, let's look at the pieces of a polynomial. We're going to identify what they are and what we would call them. Anytime at all they are talking about a coefficient, the coefficient is the number only in front of the variable, okay? So the coefficient of negative 4x squared is negative 4. The coefficient of x to the third power is what? What is the number there that I don't see but I know is there? 1. So my coefficient is 1. And then 3 is considered your constant. Okay, so I'm going to write this underneath it. I want you to write it down also. Constant is a number without a variable. Okay, think about these words and what they mean. A variable is a letter, right? Anytime we see a letter in math, we would call that a variable. Now, the word variable means to vary. It will change what it is because depending on what number I plug in for the variable, my answer will vary. So if I have like 4x and I plug in a 2, then that's going to give me, a 2 for x, then that's going to give me an 8. But what if I were to plug in a 3? What would my answer be? 12. So your answer varies depending on what the variable equals. The coefficient is considered the number in front of the variable. And then your constant, a constant means something that does not change. It stays the same. The number 3 will stay the same. It has nothing that is going to affect it. There's no x behind it to say, oh, that 3 is going to change into a 4, or it's going to change into a 5, or a 6, or whatever it may be. It's a constant. 3 is the same, and it stays the same. Okay? So let's label what is the constant in this next problem here. Josh? 4 is my constant. Now, what is the coefficient of negative x? Kyle? Negative 1. Perfect. The coefficient is negative 1. You have to read it with the sign in front of it. I wouldn't just say 1 is my coefficient because there's a negative sign or a minus sign. They're the same thing in front of it. What is the coefficient of 2x cubed? 2. Okay, so now we know each piece, we know what to call it. All right, let's get into our polynomials. Now, if I have a monomial, that means I have one term. A good example is 6x squared. Think about the prefix mono. Mono means one. Okay? If I have a binomial, that means I have two terms. Think about bi. Bi means two. A bicycle has two wheels. Okay? So that would be something like 7x plus 5x squared. I've got two different terms. Remember, what separates terms are pluses and minuses. So this plus separates two terms. So I know it's a binomial. A trinomial has three terms, 6x squared plus 3x plus 5. Tri means three. Think about a tricycle. It has three wheels. And then anything above a trinomial, we are just going to consider a polynomial. Poly means many. Okay, so anything over three terms, we're going to consider a polynomial. So 4 or more, basically. So it's over three terms, 4 or more. So 8x cubed plus 5x squared plus 9x plus 7 is a polynomial because it has 4 terms. Okay? All right, so one last thing before we actually get into what we're going to do, and the main thing I want you to know about this slide is standard form. Every single answer for every single thing in chapter 10 has to be written in standard form. Standard form just means I've got to write my polynomial with the largest exponent, or the term with the largest exponent coming first and then descending after that. So if I had something like, let's say, 5x to the 4th power plus 3x squared minus 2x to the 3rd power plus 7, I need to write this in standard form, okay? Because this is not in standard form. Standard form tells me the term with the largest exponent has to go first, and then it has to get smaller every time after that. So what term would I write first if I wanted to write these terms that I have right down here in standard form? Who can tell me? Which one would come first? Anybody? 5x to the 4th power. Because I'm looking at the exponents only. It has nothing to do with the coefficient or the number in front. It's only about the exponent. So that comes first. What would come second? Negative 2x cubed, because I have to go in descending order. What comes after that? 3x squared. And lastly, you always write your constants at the very end. They have no variable at all. They have to be at the very end. So if I were to say write your answer in standard form, it would have to look like this. The largest exponent has to come first, okay? The degree, if I were to say, what is the degree of 5x to the 4th power? The degree is the exponent, so you would say 4, okay? What's the degree of negative 2x cubed? 3. What is the degree of 3x squared? 2. What's the degree of 7? 0. There is no exponent, okay? What is the degree of x? 1. Because anytime I don't see an exponent, I know it's 1. If there's no variable at all, it's 0, okay? And lastly, the leading coefficient. When the polynomial is written in standard form, it has to be in standard form in order to identify the leading coefficient, all right? When it's in standard form, it's always the very first number in front of the variable. So what is my leading coefficient in this problem right here? 5. First number in front of the first variable. Now, if it was still written, let's say if I had a problem like this, I would need to write it in standard form first, 2x cubed plus 3. Then I would say my leading coefficient is 2. Because if I said, oh, my leading coefficient is 3, That is incorrect because it's not written in standard form. Okay? All right, now let's get into actually adding and subtracting polynomials. I asked you this question a few minutes ago, and I said, what do the terms have to be in order to add them? And you said what? Like terms. So I cannot just go, 3x squared can be added with 7, and that's 10 minus 4 is 6x. No, because those are not like terms. What I want to do is I want to add this polynomial with this polynomial. And in order to do that, I've got to write it in standard form, then line up my terms and just add. So let's look at this first problem, or this first polynomial, I guess I should say. Are those terms in standard form? No, they're not, because they've got to start out with the largest exponent. You say, but it does start out with the largest exponent, but it has to get smaller after that in order. So let's write this in standard form. What term would be written first? 5x cubed. Then what comes after that? Plus x squared. What is the number in front of x squared? Go ahead and write it. You will be happy you did. What comes after x squared? Negative 2x. And lastly, the constant always comes at the end. So now my first polynomial is written in standard form. All I need to do now is line up like terms of my second polynomial and add together. First of all, look at this second polynomial here. I start off with 5x cubed. Is there anything in that second polynomial that can add with 5x cubed? No. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a placeholder. That just means I'm going to put a 0x cubed, because I know I'm not going to add anything with 5x cubed. I'm just going to put a 0 there so I know, okay, that's what it's going to add with. Nothing, basically. Okay? What can add with 1x squared? 3x squared. So I put underneath it 3x squared. I'm going to cross it off because I've done it. Now, what can add with negative 2x? Negative 4x. And lastly, what can add with 7? 7. Now, I treat this just as it were a normal addition problem. What is 5x cubed plus 0x cubed? 5x cubed. Notice, I did not make that 5x squared. I did not make that 5x to the 6th power. Because when adding like terms, you always keep the term that makes them the like term. You never want to change that. Okay? What is 1x squared plus 3x squared? 4x squared. What is negative 2x plus negative 4x? And what is 7 plus 7? This is your final answer right here. Because I already wrote it in standard form. So I know it's in standard form. That's how I wrote the terms down. If you go ahead and write it in standard form at the very beginning, you won't have to worry about doing it at the end. All right, does anybody have any questions on that so far? All right, let's do the next one then. Are these terms in standard form in my first polynomial? Yes, I have 8x squared minus 2x plus 4. They start out with the largest exponent and get smaller from there. So I don't need to rewrite anything in this first set of parentheses. I do, however, need to line up my like terms in my second set of parentheses right underneath it. So 4x squared can be added with what? 8x squared, like terms right here. Negative 1 can be added with what? Negative 3x cubed. What can be added with negative 3x cubed? There's nothing. So where would 3x cubed go if I were writing this in standard form? At the very beginning. So I'm going to write negative 3x cubed here. I'm going to put a plus sign in front of the 4x. Okay? Now, Do I have any term at all that will add with negative 3x cubed? No, so I'm going to put a placeholder here. Do I have anything at all that's going to add with negative 2x? No, so I'm going to put a placeholder. Now I just add my terms. What is 0x cubed plus negative 3x cubed? Negative 3x cubed. What is 8x squared plus 4x squared? 12x squared. What is negative 2x plus 0x? Negative 2x. What is 4 plus negative 1? There's my answer. Is it written in standard form? Yep. I start out with my largest exponent and it gets smaller from there. Okay, that's how we would add polynomials. Now, let's subtract them. Subtracting is going to be the exact same thing with one other step. This step you're going to do at the very, very beginning. Is everybody listening? I'll give you a second to write it down and then we'll talk about what we're going to do. Okay, that very first step that we're going to do with subtracting is I'm going to take everything behind the minus sign and I'm going to do the opposite sign. So, what is 2x cubed? Positive or negative? Positive. So I'm going to change it to a negative. What is 3x? Positive or negative? So I'm going to change it to a negative. What is negative 4? Well, negative. What am I going to change it to? Positive. Now, when I do that, is everybody looking? This is going to change just to a simple addition problem, and I do exactly what I did in the last slide. Add the terms together. So, we're just going to line up our like terms, but everybody notice, we only change the signs of the last set of parentheses, not the beginning, only the end, okay? So, is my first set of terms in standard form? Yes, because I have x cubed, x squared, x to the first power, and then my constant. Okay, so let's line up like terms. I'm going to write negative 2x cubed under this. Do I have anything to add with 5x squared? No, so I'm going to put a placeholder 0x squared. Do I have anything to add with negative 4x? Negative 3x. And do I have anything to add with positive 8? Positive 4. Now just add like terms. Negative 2x cubed plus negative 2x cubed is negative 4x cubed. 5x squared plus 0x squared is 5x squared. Negative 4x plus negative 3x is negative 7x. And 8 plus 4 is 12. My answer is already in standard form, so I know I am done. Okay? Now, let's do the last one. What am I going to do first, Crystal? Before I put it in standard form, change the sign. So everything after the minus sign gets changed. 2x cubed becomes negative 2x cubed. 4x squared becomes negative 4x squared. Negative 3x becomes positive 3x. And positive 1 becomes negative 1. What type of problem do I have now? Addition. So I just make it an addition problem. Okay? Now, let's line up like terms. Negative 6x cubed goes first. What would come after negative 6x cubed? 5x, but what would come before that if I had a term there? X squared, right? So I can put 0x squared. You say, okay, why did you do that? Because I know in this second set, there's an x squared. So if I go ahead and put that placeholder, negative 4x squared actually has something to line up with. Does that make sense to everybody? You would just put what's missing. Now what comes? Plus 5x, then negative 3. Now everything in the second set of parentheses has a term to line up with. So I would write negative 2x cubed minus 4x squared plus 3x minus 1. Negative 6x cubed plus negative 2x cubed is negative 8x cubed. 0x squared plus negative 4x squared is negative 4x squared. 5x plus 3x is 8x. And negative 3 plus negative 1 is negative 4. So I know that this is my final answer. Okay? That is how we add and subtract polynomials.